So I play amateur football here in Montana, and I played for a couple of different teams now. This one game I played back in 2014 though, ended really badly for me. I ended up getting my bell rung, which is bad enough, but when I woke up and tried to move, what I can only describe as the worst pain in my life shot up through my leg. I heard one of the guys near me say something like, "Oh, Jesus Christ, dude, look at his leg." I knew it must have been pretty bad, but what I didn't realize is that it was a complete compound fracture that would take more than a year to fully heal. My tibia had torn right out through the meat of my skin, meaning I needed to be rushed into surgery or I might actually have lost my leg. Then, once that whole process was out of the way, I needed some serious rehab in order to get back on my feet. I put on a bunch of weight, ended up getting hooked on pain meds for a while, which was a whole nother drama, and basically became a totally different person over the course of about 6 or 7 months. It was probably my lowest point in my life so far, and I knew it was going to be a hard road to get back to playing football again. My first goal though was to lose all that weight and gain back the strength in my legs. For that, I needed some harder forms of training. Trouble was, I was feeling seriously embarrassed getting back in the gym, which I know is kind of a dumb issue that's completely in my own head, but it felt pretty real to me at the time. Instead, I opted for another kind of exercise to get back into shape, and that was hiking. My hiking spot of choice ended up being this one particular trail in the Beaverhead Deer Lodge National Forest, which is about 30 miles south of my hometown of Butte. So I drive on down to this little town called the Wise River, park my truck near this awesome little saloon whose owner I was pretty friendly with. Then I tried hiking up to Round Top Mountain, getting further and further to the summit every try. Between the buck and change in weight that I put on and my weak shins, it was absolute agony at first. I even remember this one time, I was sitting down on a log on the side of the trail, pouring Advil down my neck and feeling like a piece of trash. When I looked up the trailway, I saw this log cabin sitting there on the ridgeline, looking all lofty and king-like, staring out over the valley. I told myself, I'm going to make it up to you one day, and when I do, I'm gonna drink from my water bottle like it's full of champagne. That became my goal over the summer, to make it all the way up to that cabin on the ridge. Surely by that point, my leg would be back to normal, and I'd be back to my usual 190 pounds. That was me for almost the whole month of July, hiking up Round Top at least twice a week, and feeling it get a bit easier each time as well. Then, one day, I finally did it. My God, seeing that cabin up close and personal came with a feeling of pure elation. Only thing was, I'd completely sank the contents of my water bottle by the time I'd reached it, and since it would be another hour of hike back to my truck, I figured I might as well see if the owners had an outside faucet or something I could use to fill up. So I start walking up the trail, then turn off to walk up the path that leads to the cabin. As soon as I got within earshot, I could hear someone singing on the inside. That was kind of a relief in itself, to know someone was home, and I'd definitely at least get some water. I wasn't worried if I'd be welcome or not, as someone singing that loud to themselves what sounded like a happy tune. I doubted they'd be grumpy enough to turn away a stranger for just asking for water, especially on such a hot day. I got right up close to the front door of the cabin. The man inside was still singing a song. I looked it up later, and it was from a Jerry Lee Lewis song called She Even Woke Me Up to Say Goodbye. The way the guy was singing was all loud and stuff. He was either in a sort of good mood or really drunk. Probably both if I had to guess. Next thing I know, I knock on the guy's door and announce myself. He didn't respond in any way, so I figured he might have earbuds or headphones on or something. The door to the cabin was slightly ajar, something I'd only noticed after already knocking. So while half praying that he didn't freak out or shoot me or something, I edged the door open to look inside, maybe give him a wave to let him know I was there. So I pushed the door open, and I see the little kitchen and dining room is empty, with the singing coming from the bedroom now. Somehow, the guy still hadn't heard me, but that made sense, considering the whole place stunk of strong booze. I could tell there was something else in the air though, something that smelled almost metallic. Before I had a chance to truly think about what that might mean, the owner of the cabin appeared shirtless from the bedroom area, carrying a jug of what looked like moonshine or some other kind of home brew. What surprised me was that he was not drinking it though. He was splashing it all over the floor for some reason. When he locked eyes with me, he had this "oh crap" kind of look on his face that made me instantly nervous. As I was starting to back out of the open doorway, I noticed why he'd look so frightened about being disturbed. In the corner of that small room he'd emerged from, there was a woman sitting slumped on the floor with her back to the wall. Above her, coating the wall, was a smatter of blood, like she'd slid down the wall after being shot or something. I turned to run, not even thinking about it. I knew I needed to get out of there. Instead of running the way I came though, which would have made me an easy shot should the guy pull a gun or something, I went running through the trees at the side of the house for more cover. Keep in mind, I couldn't run properly at this stage in my healing. My shin was hollering at me something fierce. If I had gone off running the way of the trail, the man would have been able to just line up his sights and shoot me down like fish in a barrel. My fears were confirmed when I heard a gunshot ring out behind me. That really got rid of the pain in my leg almost instantly. Adrenaline is one heck of a drug as it turns out. I almost went tumbling down the slopes a bunch of times. I think I skidded down on my butt for most of it, but eventually I got to a point where I felt safe enough to pull out my cell phone and call 911. I was able to tell the cops about the body and the shot I thought had been fired at me. The guy looked like he was about to burn the place down, so they better get there quick. Then again, there was no fast way of getting up a steep hill like Round Top, so by the time the cops got there, the place was fully ablaze. I think that was the case anyway. I mean, I could see the smoke rising all the way from my car when I'd hiked back down. After I drove back home, I only got the full story when the cops came to talk to me about what exactly I'd seen. Turns out the guy had gone through his wife's phone or something and found out she was cheating, flew into a rage and blasted her. Only what I didn't see was that he'd shot his 2 kids too, and he'd stacked their bodies on the bed before dousing the place with what the cops believed was some kind of homemade liqueur. The sound of the shot wasn't him coming out to take a shot at me. He'd walked outside his burning cabin and shot himself in the face right out front. That was the shot I'd heard, the one that made me run like hell. It made for a real open and shut case from what I can tell. Not much to investigate, not many questions to ask. Just a whole lot of insaneness that's better left forgotten about, I suppose. But then again, what if you can't forget about it? What if every time I look south up at the hills, I think about the way he was just singing to himself after he took his whole family's lives? I just don't get why he wanted to make them victims of a situation that was so messed up to begin with. How can a person feel that entitled to the lives of their own children? Like I said, I think I've come to the depressing conclusion that good things are mostly fleeting. Then, seeing something like I did up there on Round Top, those bad things I was talking about, they have a habit of staying with you for much longer than anyone would like them to. One of the worst days of my life started when me and a hiking buddy of mine came across this run-down old hunting cabin out in the woods. I mean, it was so shabby looking that we couldn't have imagined it being anything but abandoned, so we didn't see any harm in exploring it a little bit before we moved back onto the trail we'd been wandering down. We walk inside, start looking around, only to see that it didn't look abandoned at all. The stove had clearly been in use sometime within the last day or so, as it still smelled like burning wood. There were food wrappers strewn about, with what looked like some torn open first aid supplies as well. Someone had definitely been there recently. Instead of continuing our little trespassing, we decided to move on instead of risking making the owner angry or whatever. Then though, That's when we heard this really faint noise coming from somewhere, something that sounded an awful lot like a person's voice. I looked at my buddy. "You hear that?" We both stood real still for a second and strained our ears, only to hear a distinct "help me" coming from beneath us. This hit us like a ton of bricks. We started looking around for some kind of hatch or something, and ended up finding the opening to a root cellar outside. We opened it up, only to find some random guy covered in blood with what we thought was a gunshot or stab wound to one of his legs. We asked the guy what happened, and his reply was honestly one of the most haunting things I've ever heard in my entire life. "You have to help me. He'll be back soon." Jesus, dude, it was like something out of a horror movie. Like that stomach-dropping moment, you realize that the main characters have just stumbled upon a world of trouble. Only this time we were the main characters, and this wasn't some dumb story with a happy ending. It was real, and we had no idea what to do. We kept on asking him, "Who'll be back? Who did this to you?" But the man kept begging us to get him out of the cellar. Obviously, that was the first thing we did, as he basically answered our questions in the way that he was all messed up and obviously scared of whoever was coming back. We helped him out of that cellar, got one of his arms over each of our shoulders, and helped him limp down the trail back towards where we'd first walked onto it. No one ever caught up with us or anything. The person who had shot or stabbed him never rounded the trail behind us, but my God, the whole time I was checking everything, expecting some knife-wielding psycho to emerge from the woods intent on killing us. We managed to flag down a truck that was passing down one of the main roads that ran through the park. The guy inside was nice enough to rush the dude to the hospital, even though he'd gotten blood all over the upholstery. Turns out the guy survived, and the person who had attacked him was his hunting buddy, who had snapped after some kind of trivial argument. It's crazy that someone would do something like that to a person they called a friend, but I guess weirder things have happened. Definitely the scariest thing that's ever happened to me while out on a hike. My buddy says the same thing too. It was that line of "he'll be back soon" that I'll never forget so. It was so eerie it had me trembling with fear as we rushed to help this guy get to safety. Sometimes I wonder just how close the guy chasing him actually was. Maybe if we'd been a bit earlier or later, the guy who'd done it might have done the same thing to us just to keep us quiet. So back when me and my brother were fairly young, our parents weren't exactly well off. Mom had been out of regular work for more than 2 years due to the childbirths and needing to take care of us, and Dad was still basically at entry level for his career. Because they worked so hard on carving out life for us as a family though, they were in dire need of a vacation. Only thing was that because of our financial situation, it had to be a real budget vacation. Which is how they found a cheap log cabin in the Cascades that was available for just over $100 a week. From what they'd told us, it wasn't like one of those too good to be true kind of deals either. There wasn't anything remotely suspicious about that place, though it was rough around the edges. From what the owner told them, it was quiet, secluded, and well off the beaten path. The perfect place to get some peace and quiet, away from the hustle and bustle of Seattle. I think all it took was making sure it was safe for kids, ensuring there were no bodies of water around or anything. Then they went ahead and booked it for 5 days in June or July. I was really into animals and nature stuff back then. Still am really. My brother was a pretty chill kid, so they could have taken him anywhere and he'd have found something to keep himself occupied. When we arrived at the cabin, we were both pretty excited with these new surroundings. Even if it meant we had to share a bed in a small, rustic-looking one-room cabin. We didn't care if it was too small or if it was in the middle of nowhere. It was like a real adventure to us at that age. Being so immersed in nature was something I particularly found really exciting. The first day we arrived in the early afternoon, I remember running around the cabin with my mom before she took my brother and I out to explore the surrounding area. We had a small dinner that my dad cooked on the stove with the groceries we'd bought. Then we ended up playing board games until it was time for bed. Everything was really good for the first day. It was only during the night that I noticed something seemed to be off. I remember waking up in the middle of the night to find that my dad was out of bed and over by the small window near the cabin's front door. Mom was sat up as well, whispering to him in the low light. My brother was fast asleep as I asked them what was wrong and why Dad was out of bed. I remember them both kind of jumping when I spoke. I guess I'd surprised them. They told me Dad couldn't sleep. The bed was too small or something, and he was letting Mom get some sleep before he went to bed himself. I remember thinking that was kind of a weird explanation. The bed looked plenty big for me. At that age, kids just kind of take their parents' word for stuff like that though, don't they? As they continued to whisper to each other in the darkness, I went back to sleep. The next morning, Mom and Dad were sat at the table, looking all worried and stressed out about something. I could tell something was wrong even at that age, but I was still excited to be on vacation. I was definitely excited to get back into the great outdoors to try and spot some animals. I asked if I could play outside, and my parents said it was okay, just as long as I didn't go anywhere near where they couldn't see me from the window. If I couldn't see the window myself, I'd already gone too far. That's what they told me. I opened the cabin door, walked outside, and on the edge of the porch was what looked like a little figurine. It was shaped like a tiny little man. It looked to me like it had been carved out of wood or something. I remember picking it up and playing with it for a little while, making the little guy run through the grass and jump out onto logs and stuff. Next thing I know, I saw one sitting on the hood of my mom and dad's car as well. Naturally, I ran over to grab that one too. Now I had two little stick men to play with. I was in the middle of my little game when my brother came outside. He's older than me, and back then he was definitely more attuned to mom and dad's moods. He told me something was wrong with them. They seemed worried or sad about something. That made me sad too. This was supposed to be a happy vacation for us all. An adventure, just like they'd said. I remember it being much harder to have fun after that, knowing my mom and dad were worried about something. Still, I showed my brother the new toys and invited him to play along with me. I gave him one of the little figurines. Then he kept asking to play with the other one too. It wasn't long before an unimportant childish scuffle started between he and I. He attempted to wrestle the little figurine out of my hand. It didn't take long before I started to cry, which prompted our mom and dad to come running out of the cabin at the sound. I don't remember them running out with any particular urgency, but years later they told us that sound terrified them in the moment, especially in light of what had happened the night before. They asked what we were fighting over, and that's how they discovered the little white figurines we'd been playing with. Right then, my dad took them from my brother, and he immediately started asking us, "Where did you get these? Tell me where they were." He was so angry that my brother started crying too. He pointed at me and said that it was me that had found them. I was already upset, but I remember getting even more upset when I realized we might get in trouble for having played with them. I told my mom and dad exactly where I'd found them. They'd just been sitting right there. I hadn't stolen them or taken them from someone else or anything. It seemed totally harmless to me, just playing with little wood-carved figures. I had no idea they weren't made of wood at all. Next thing I remember, Mom and Dad rushed us back into the cabin, then weirdly changed their approach as they reassured us we weren't in any trouble. Mom proceeded to comfort my brother and I. I noticed my dad was now packing all our stuff back into our suitcases at 100 miles per hour. He was the same way, making sure to put on a brave face as he got ready to get us out of there. Then they explained to us they had to take us home early because Dad needed to get back to work or something. I can't remember the exact excuse. They promised it wasn't because we'd done anything bad though. We could continue playing in the backyard when we got home. I asked if we could take the little figures with us. Both of them almost snapped at me, saying no at the same time. Within maybe 10 or 15 minutes, we were back in the car driving back to Seattle again, with this real tense mood in the car as we drove. It was pretty tense for the rest of the day. Then, Mom took us into the small backyard we had and told us we'd have our very own little nature play session right there. It was only a small backyard, but we still had fun watching the birds. Then we had a little picnic. All the trouble back at the cabin was forgotten about amongst my brother and I. So, cut to like 20 years later. It's during the holiday, and me and my brother had come home for Christmas dinner. We were sitting around reminiscing in the TV room, talking about this and that, when my brother suddenly brought up the aborted cabin vacation from when we were kids. He hadn't forgotten about the two little figures either, and why Mom and Dad had seemingly got so weirdly mad about me finding them. My mom and dad just gave each other this look. My mom shook her head and covered her face with her hands, like she couldn't bear to remember the whole thing. And that's when my dad told the actual story of what happened back then. So as they were drifting off to sleep that night, Dad had heard someone moving around outside the cabin. Not just like walking by casually either. The footsteps were slow and careful, like whoever was making them didn't want to be found. That's how Dad ended up peering out the window so late at night. Although I hadn't seen at the time, he'd had his old kitchen knife in his hand, just waiting for someone to burst through the door. That had scared them both pretty badly, but they didn't want to just bail on the vacation they'd already paid for, the one they both felt they needed so badly. They were of two minds about it though. They decided to stay one more night just to make sure it wasn't some kids messing around or something. If it happened again, we were just going to leave, but they didn't even get that far. Right around the same time they were discussing this, the incident with the little figurines happened. They weren't made of wood at all. They were figurines made from bones. I'm not going to pretend to know what kind of bone or animal they came from. God forbid they came from a person or whatever. But like I said, my dad was smart enough to recognize the texture and realized that whoever had been outside the previous night must have left them there for some reason. I mean, you don't leave bone figures on someone's porch as a welcome gift, do you? Not in the middle of the night anyway. Instead of sticking around like they'd thought they might, they just said, "Let's get out of there." My dad figured he could protect the family from some lone peeping Tom or something, but from someone who carved stuff out of bone to leave as a warning, that wasn't someone you wanted to go up against in the middle of nowhere. Personally, I think that was a smart move myself, and I respect them for making the hard decision they had to. This all started a couple of days ago, about July 5th or so. I'd get a random call from FedEx around 10 p.m., where they asked me for my name and my address, which they already knew. I gave it to them, thinking it might be a package that was lost and somehow found its way back to my home. In hindsight, I should have known FedEx doesn't deliver past 8 p.m. here in Canada. I didn't think anything of it though, until I got another phone call from them saying they couldn't find my unit number. They asked me to come out to the roundabout nearby my place. My dad immediately thought this was really weird, so he patrolled the area to find these people. My dad did around 4 laps. The first lap, there wasn't anything there. Then, though, I got curious and joined him for the second one. Yet again, nothing. My dad did a third lap around the house, only to find a gray SUV hiding in the corner. He went and confronted them. They told my dad they weren't the delivery person, and my dad left to do another confirmation check. As he was doing that last lap though, the same SUV was no longer there. The next day, July 6th, around 6 to 11 p.m., we heard a doorbell ringing. I went down to check, and it was 2 people I didn't know, around the ages of 20 or so I'd say. They knew my name though, and one of them was calling out for me. Again, this was extremely strange, as I'd never seen them before. I didn't feel safe, so I didn't pursue them or try to talk to them. They kept coming over and over again though, so we called the police soon after and talked about what steps we could take. The cops told me to contact them if this happened again. The next day, July 7th, it was very quiet and nothing weird happened. We thought the worst had ended because of this and went about with our business as usual. On the next day though, it was that same quietness. When the time approached 11 p.m., my security camera spotted an individual with a mask, seemingly taking photos or videos of our house. That was the breaking point. We contacted the police and informed them about this suspicious behavior. Just when we'd thought it was finally over, I was casually in the living room around 3 a.m. the same day. Suddenly, I heard a thunking outside on my balcony. I thought it could really be anything. I didn't mind it too much until I heard that sound once again. I went to the balcony to see what I was hearing, and then it clicked. I was face to face with an intruder. I started screaming for help. My family ran down to check out the commotion. Thank God I checked the sound that day. Who knows what else could have happened if I just chalked it up to an animal or something. Today is July 9th, and I haven't got a wink of sleep thinking of the terror that I've been facing. Am I one of the targets of a home invasion? How'd they get my name in the first place? And why are they doing this to me? Update. So the house was lit on fire. I repeat, our house was lit on fire. Thankfully, we're all safe, but the police told me they threw a Molotov through the window or something. I really don't know what's going on, but if I have any further updates, I'll be sure to let you know.